When did a neighbor's crisis shatter your peace and force a choice? The day Harold Cook, 58M, showed up on my porch looking like he'd slept in a dumpster fire, I knew my quiet retirement was officially over. I'd always prided myself on being the kind of neighbor who kept to herself, offering a wave and a polite nod, but rarely inviting deeper entanglement. Now, looking at Harold's bloodshot eyes and the tremor in his hands as he clutched a crumpled manila envelope, I faced a moral quandary. Step in and potentially unravel a hornet's nest, or turn a blind eye and let a good man, or at least a man I'd always considered good, possibly fall apart. My internal monologue, usually reserved for the crossword puzzle, was screaming. It started subtly, as most disasters do. My routine was a well-oiled machine. Wake with the sun, strong coffee, a few rounds of solitaire on the tablet, then a walk around the block. It was on one of these walks about 2 months ago that I first noticed Michael Nguyen, 29M. He was new to the neighborhood, having bought the little blue house 2 doors down from me, a place that had sat vacant for nearly a year after old Mrs. Henderson moved to assisted living. Michael was a blur of activity, always either lugging boxes, repainting a fence post, or meticulously pruning the overgrown rose bushes. He seemed polite, though reserved, offering a quick, almost shy smile when our paths crossed. He looked sharp too, even when sweating through a t-shirt, the kind of effortlessly put-together young man who made me feel like an extra in my own life story. My only direct interaction had been a quick welcome to the neighborhood and a plate of my infamous lemon bars, which he accepted with genuine gratitude. He worked in tech. He'd mentioned briefly, something about software development. Young people these days, I swear, they speak in code even when they're speaking English. Then there was Eric Hernandez, 30M. Eric lived directly across the street from me, in the house with the perfectly manicured lawn and the perpetually spotless sedan. Eric was, for lack of a better word, nosy. Not maliciously so, perhaps, but certainly intensely curious. He knew who was coming and going, who had a new car, who was getting their roof replaced. He'd often coincidentally be retrieving his mail just as I was heading out, striking up a conversation that inevitably veered into neighborhood gossip. I'd tried, in my subtle Joan, 76F way, to politely deflect or offer vague responses, but Eric was persistent. Worked from home, he said, something in marketing, which apparently afforded him ample time for neighborhood reconnaissance. I had often wondered if his company actually paid him for his observations on Mrs. Henderson's new porch swing or Mr. Thompson's unruly hedges. He was a bright kid, I supposed energetic, but his enthusiasm often felt like an interrogation. His questions about Michael, especially, had been relentless since the younger man moved in. "Have you seen what he does with all those packages, Joan?" He'd asked once, leaning over my rose bush, his eyes wide. "Seems like a lot of electronics." I just hummed vaguely and changed the subject to the weather, a classic Joan maneuver. Harold Cook was a different story. Harold had lived next door to me for 20-some years. His wife, Mary, had passed away about 5 years ago, and he'd been a bit lost ever since. Harold was a creature of habit, a retired accountant who still wore sensible shoes and tucked his shirts in, even on weekends. He was kind, dependable, if a little predictable. We'd shared countless cups of coffee on our respective porches, discussing everything from local politics to the best way to keep squirrels out of the bird feeder. Harold had worked for the same software company, Omnitech, for over 30 years. It was a well-respected firm, a big name in the local tech scene. He'd always spoken proudly of his work, the stability it provided, the camaraderie. He'd mentioned Michael a few times, casually, saying how surprising it was to have another techie move into such a quiet corner of suburbia. He seemed genuinely pleased by the coincidence. "Imagine that, Joan." He chuckled over my fence one afternoon. "Another coating was right here. Small world, isn't it?" He'd told me Michael was in a different division at Omnitech, a newer, more cutting-edge one. Harold, as a seasoned veteran, worked on legacy systems, the backbone stuff, as he called it. He seemed to genuinely respect Michael's youth and drive. Then, about a month ago, the cracks started to show. Harold became quieter. He stopped his usual morning wave. His lawn, normally impeccable, started to get shaggy. His face, usually ruddy and pleasant, grew pale and drawn. I tried to engage him to ask if everything was all right, but he'd just nod vaguely, mumble something about being tired, and retreat into his house. It wasn't like Harold to pull away. I found myself watching him more, something I usually frowned upon in others. I saw him coming home later and later, his shoulders slumped. He started to look genuinely unwell. I even called his landline a couple of times, but he never picked up and he didn't return my messages. Creeping unease settled in my stomach. My first real insight into Harold's distress came indirectly, of course, through Eric. One afternoon, as I was pruning my hydrangeas, Eric appeared holding a shimmering iridescent drone. "Hey, Joan," he called out a little too loudly. "Just testing out my new toy. Pretty neat, huh? Got a fantastic camera on it." He then proceeded to fly the drone in increasingly elaborate patterns over our street, occasionally dipping it low over Michael's house. I pretended not to notice, focusing on a particularly stubborn hydrangea branch. Eric, however, was not subtle. "You know," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "I've been noticing some weird things with Harold lately. He looks stressed, more than stressed. He looks like he's seen a ghost." I straightened up, feigning casual interest. "Oh, Harold, he's been a bit quiet, yes." Eric nodded, his eyes bright with a mixture of concern and something else, something I couldn't quite place, perhaps a thrill of discovery. "Yeah, well, last night I heard him shouting. Loudly, and not at the TV. It sounded like he was on the phone, really angry. And then I saw Michael's car leave a little while later, really fast, after midnight." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Coincidence? I don't know, Joan, I just don't know." I felt a familiar prickle of irritation at Eric's meddling, but beneath it, a genuine tremor of worry for Harold. Michael leaving Harold's house after midnight after a shouted phone call? That was decidedly un-Harold. A few days later, the neighborhood grapevine Eric delivered another snippet. "Harold's been missing a lot of work," Eric informed me, almost gleefully, as I collected my newspaper from the mailbox. My cousin works at Omni Tech in HR, and he's been taking a lot of sick days, and he looks awful. What do you think, Joan? Is he having a breakdown? I bristled. Eric, Harold is a private man. Perhaps he's just under the weather. We shouldn't speculate. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't just under the weather. This was deeper. The news from Eric's cousin, usually a source of mild annoyance, now felt like a punch to the gut. Harold missing work, unthinkable. The day Harold arrived on my porch, it was just afternoon. The sun was high, baking the asphalt, and a sticky humidity hung in the air, but he was wearing a rumpled, heavy suit jacket. His hair was disheveled, plastered to his forehead with sweat. His tie was loose. He looked like he'd been running. Joan, he rasped, his voice raw, I need your help. His eyes, normally a clear blue, were bloodshot and darted around nervously. He looked like a cornered animal. Let him inside, my own heart beginning to thump in irregular rhythm. The cool air of my living room, usually so soothing, seemed to intensify the tension radiating off him. He sank onto my sofa, not in his usual polite, upright posture, but slumping as if all his bones had suddenly given way. Harold, what on earth happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, practical. I offered him a glass of water, which he took with shaking hands, spilling some on his jacket. Took a long, shuddering breath. It's Michael, he started, then stopped, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me, perhaps a painful memory playing out on the wall. He sabotaged me, Joan. My brow furrowed. Sabotaged you at Omni Tech? The word sabotage felt so melodramatic, so out of place in our quiet suburban bubble. Harold, who barely raised his voice, was accusing his young, seemingly shy colleague of something so sinister, it seemed impossible. Yet the look on his face, the sheer terror in his eyes told me he believed every word. Harold finally managed to string together a coherent sentence, though his voice was still hoarse. My project, the legacy system migration, it was due last week. I've been working on it for a year, Joan, literally a year of my life. He choked on the words. It crashed, completely. Data corrupted, critical modules failing, They put me on administrative leave, with intent to terminate. Stomach dropped. Harold fired after 30 years, this was catastrophic. But how could Michael be involved? I asked, trying to connect the dots. The quiet, polite young man who accepted my lemon bars with a sweet smile, it didn't fit. He's been subtly messing with my code for months, Harold said, his voice rising in pitch. Little things at first, a function here, a variable there. Nothing that would cause a full breakdown, just glitches. I thought I was making mistakes. Old age, you know. My eyes playing tricks, my memory failing. He rubbed his temples vigorously. But then, a few weeks ago, it got worse. Critical errors, things I knew I hadn't done. I brought it up to my manager, but he just told me to double-check my work. Said I must be tired. Michael was always there, offering to help me to look over my files. He was so helpful, Joan, always available. I thought he was genuinely being kind. The new kid looking out for the old-timer. His voice was laced with bitter irony. He pulled the crumpled manila envelope onto his lap. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a stack of printouts. These are snippets, code logs. I stayed up all night, Joan. I dug and I dug. He injected malicious code. Not just errors, but actual deliberate lines of code designed to corrupt my work, to make it look like I was incompetent. He pointed to a line of gibberish on one of the printouts. See this. This is his digital signature. His developer ID is embedded in these lines. I recognized it from a shared project we had early on. It's undeniable. The gravity of his words hit me like a physical blow. Sabotage. Intentional, malicious, professional sabotage. And against Harold, a man who wouldn't hurt a fly, by Michael, the polite young man I'd just welcomed to the neighborhood. The moral dilemma returned, sharper than before. This wasn't just a neighborly spat. This was a man's livelihood, his reputation, his legacy being destroyed. And I was being asked to mediate or at least help in something far beyond my usual scope of expertise. My reluctant mediator role was about to get a baptism by fire. Why, Harold? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why would Michael do something like this? Harold looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant. I don't know, Joan, I have no idea. Barely interacted beyond pleasantries. I always thought he was a good kid. Quiet, focused. He never seemed to have any ill will towards me. Why would he target me? He trailed off, his gaze fixed on the printouts, as if the answers were hidden in the lines of code. My mind, usually so clear and methodical, felt foggy. This was a messy situation, far messier than anything I had anticipated. My quiet retirement was well and truly over. I looked at Harold, slumped on my couch, his life seemingly in ruins, and a wave of protective instinct washed over me. I couldn't just let him fall apart. But what could I, a 76-year-old retired school librarian, possibly do against a seemingly brilliant, malicious young man armed with code and a corporate structure? I had to help him. But how? My mind immediately went to Eric, the nosy neighbor with his drone and his HR cousin. He knew things. He saw things. It might even, despite my general annoyance with his prying, be an unexpected asset. A risky one, perhaps, but an asset nonetheless. This was a fight I hadn't signed up for, but looking at Harold, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not now. My mind, usually so clear and methodical, felt foggy. This was a messy situation, far messier than anything I had anticipated. My quiet retirement was well and truly over. I looked at Harold, slumped on my couch, his life seemingly in ruins, and a wave of protective instinct washed over me. I couldn't just let him fall apart. But what could I, a 76-year-old retired school librarian, possibly do against a seemingly brilliant, malicious young man armed with code and a corporate structure? I had to help him. But how? My mind immediately went to Eric, the nosy neighbor with his drone and his HR cousin. He knew things. He saw things. Might even, despite my general annoyance with his prying, be an unexpected asset. A risky one, perhaps, but an asset nonetheless. This was a fight I hadn't signed up for, but looking at Harold, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not now. Harold, I said, my voice firmer than I felt, we are going to figure this out. First, you need to eat something and then you need to get some rest. I made him a strong cup of tea and a ham sandwich, which he picked at listlessly. He looked utterly defeated. As he ate, I started formulating a plan, a strategy entirely alien to my usual routines. The initial wave of panic gave way to a cold, methodical resolve. This wasn't about me anymore, it was about Harold. And Michael, in a way. I couldn't comprehend such malice, but first I needed more information. And Eric, for all his irritating qualities, was a fan of it. After Harold had finished what he could manage, I helped him to my guest room, a room that had seen little use since my nephew's brief college visit a decade ago. He collapsed onto the bed, fully dressed, and was asleep almost instantly, the tension still etched on his face. I closed the door softly and walked to my front window. Eric's sedan was predictably spotless in his driveway. He was probably inside, meticulously tracking the neighborhood squirrels. It was time for a delicate conversation. Next morning, armed with a plate of my infamous lemon bars, a Trojan horse, if ever there was one, I walked across the street. Eric answered the door almost immediately, as if he'd been hovering. "Joan, to what do I owe this distinct pleasure?" he chirped, his eyes immediately drawn to the lemon bars. "Thought you might appreciate a little treat," I said, offering the plate. "And I was hoping you had a moment to chat about Harold." His bright smile faltered slightly, replaced by an expression of heightened alertness. "Oh, Harold, yeah, he's been looking rough. What's up?" We sat on his perfectly white porch swing. I kept my tone casual, concerned neighbor, not a woman on the verge of uncovering corporate espionage. "He's going through a very difficult time, Eric. Something at work, it's serious." I watched his face. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Serious how? Like medical or like a scandal?" I sighed dramatically. "More like a grave injustice, I'm afraid. He mentioned something about issues with his project, some unexpected problems." I decided to be vague, letting Eric's imagination do the heavy lifting. "He's very worried about his job." Eric's interest was palpable. "His job at Omnitech? Wow, what kind of unexpected problems? Code issues?" His eyes narrowed. "You know Michael works there too. Do you think there's any connection?" He wasn't asking, he was probing, testing. I feigned surprise. "Michael? Oh, I wouldn't think so. Why would you even suggest that?" I played the innocent old woman, though inside I was practically holding my breath. "Well," Eric began, leaning back, a thoughtful expression on his face, "I just know a lot of people at Omnitech. And there's been buzz about Harold's project. How it's been delayed, how there were some serious errors. And Michael, he's been fast-tracked over there. A real golden boy. He's working on some new AI initiative, apparently a big deal. Say he's quite ruthless when it comes to his career." He paused, taking a lemon bar. "And don't forget that night I heard Harold shouting and then Michael speeding off." He took another bite. "My cousin Brenda in HR, she mentioned Michael was put on a different team for a bit, helping troubleshoot some legacy systems. Might have been Harold's, come to think of it." My heart gave a little jolt. This was it. This was the opening. "Really? Brenda, do you think she'd be able to shed any more light on this situation? Harold is completely distraught. He feels like he's being unfairly targeted." I made sure my voice conveyed deep concern, but also a hint of helplessness to appeal to Eric's protective, problem-solving side. Eric chewed thoughtfully. "Brenda's pretty tight-lipped about specific cases. HR, you know, but she talks generally, and she knows everything." He brightened. Maybe I could ask her about general company policies, internal investigations, things like that. If Harold feels targeted, there must be a process, right? I'm good at finding processes." His eyes twinkled. "I could do some research, discreetly, of course." I gave him my most grateful, grandmotherly smile. "That would be a tremendous help, Eric, any information at all." Left him with the remaining lemon bars and a mission, feeling a sliver of hope and a growing sense of discomfort about how easily I had manipulated Eric's nosiness for my own ends. 2 weeks later, Harold was still residing in my guest room, though he was beginning to regain some color in his cheeks. He'd been too ashamed to go back to his own house, convinced the neighbors were all whispering. I gently tried to persuade him otherwise, but his pride had taken a severe beating. I spent the time poring over the code logs he'd given me, pretending to understand them, though most of it was gibberish. What I did understand were the dates and the timestamps, and the recurring developer ID that Harold had identified as Michael's. It was a digital fingerprint. Eric, meanwhile, had transformed from a merely nosy neighbor into a full-blown amateur detective, buzzing with information. He'd learned that Omnitech had recently been acquired by a larger tech conglomerate, and there was immense pressure to streamline operations and phase out older systems. Harold's legacy project, though critical, was seen as a bottleneck. "Brenda said," Eric had reported, almost breathless over the fence last Tuesday, "that there's a big push for younger talent, people who can handle the new AI stuff. They want to cut costs too. Old guard, new guard, you know?" He then lowered his voice dramatically. She also mentioned Michael got a huge bonus and a promotion tied to the successful migration of a certain key legacy system. Guess which one that was? He didn't wait for my answer. "Harold's." This piece of information hit me hard. A bonus and a promotion. The motive, stark and ugly, was now clear. Michael hadn't just sabotaged Harold, he had gained from it. This wasn't some random act of malice, it was calculated, a ruthless career move. My image of the shy young man with the sweet smile shattered completely. "Eric," I said, interrupting his excited monologue, "we need to go beyond HR gossip. This is a criminal matter, tampering with company systems, destroying someone's livelihood. This is serious." Eric paused, his usual exuberance dimming slightly. "Criminal, you really think so?" He seemed a little taken aback by the gravity of my tone. "Harold has proof, Eric, hard proof. His digital signature is on the malicious code. You need to get legal help, someone who understands corporate law and digital forensics." Eric looked thoughtful, then nodded slowly. "My cousin Brenda, her brother-in-law, is a corporate lawyer. He specializes in intellectual property and employment law. He's supposed to be really good, cutthroat but good." He looked at me, a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "You think Harold has a case?" "I think he has a right to fight," I said firmly. "And he needs to. This cannot stand." Convincing Harold to meet with a lawyer was another uphill battle. He was still steeped in shame, convinced that fighting back would only make things worse, publicly expose him as a failure. "Joan, I'm an old man. What's the point? My career is over." "The point, Harold," I'd argued, "is justice. The point is your reputation. The point is not letting a bully walk all over you. Took me 2 full days of cajoling, presenting the evidence as explained by Eric, and appealing to his sense of right and wrong before he finally reluctantly agreed. Eric, surprisingly, was invaluable here too. He found the lawyer's contact information, insisted on driving Harold to the initial consultation, and even offered to sit in, ostensibly as moral support. I suspected he just wanted a ringside seat, but I welcomed the assistance. This whole experience was transforming Eric. He was still nosy, but his energy was now focused, directed, and genuinely helpful. He was becoming less of an annoyance and more of a partner. The idea made me smile. A month had passed since Harold first appeared on my porch. The initial legal consultation had been productive, though daunting. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, confirmed that Harold had a strong case, especially with the digital signature. Challenge, she explained, would be proving intent and navigating Omnitech's corporate legal team. They'll try to bury him in paperwork, she'd warned. They'll discredit him. They might even try to frame him as incompetent or worse, malicious himself. But she'd also said, the digital signature is a powerful piece of evidence, and the timing of Mr. Nguyen's promotion is highly suspicious. Harold, initially overwhelmed, had started to show flickers of his old self. He was still quiet, but there was a new resolve in his eyes, a glint of defiance. He even started spending a few hours a day back at his own house, slowly tending to his neglected garden. The biggest twist, however, came not from Omnitech but from Eric. He'd been unusually quiet for a few days, a rare state for him. When he finally showed up on my porch, his face was grim. "Joan," he began without preamble, "I've been doing some more digging. Not just through Brenda, through other channels?" I raised an eyebrow, curious. "It's about Michael. He's not exactly who we thought he was." He hesitated, something rare for Eric. "Remember how I said he was a golden boy fast-tracked? Well, he was, but not entirely for the reasons we thought. He was under immense pressure. His family, they're in a lot of debt. Medical bills, I think. And Omnitech, or rather, the new conglomerate, they leveraged that. Told him if he could expedite the legacy system migration read, make Harold's project fail so they could replace it with their own new system and push Harold out, they'd give him a massive bonus and clear his family's debt. He was caught between a rock and a hard place." Eric's voice was low, unusually somber. He didn't want to hurt Harold. He actually respected Harold's work, but he felt he had no choice. My jaw dropped. This was a completely unexpected revelation. Didn't excuse Michael's actions, not by a long shot, but it added a layer of tragic complexity. He wasn't a purely malicious actor, he was a desperate one. "How did you find this out, Eric?" I asked, a mix of shock and grudging admiration in my voice. Eric just shrugged, looking away. "Let's just say I have a knack for putting pieces together. And Michael? He talks to some of his old college friends online. They were worried about him. One of them, he mentioned seeing Michael looking really distraught, talking about a deal with the devil to save his family." Eric looked at me, his eyes now devoid of their usual gleam of gossip, replaced by a quiet sympathy. "It doesn't make it right, Joan. What he did was wrong, but it makes it understandable in a way." This new information threw a wrench into my perfectly formed narrative of good versus evil. Michael wasn't purely evil, he was a victim of circumstance too. Harold was wronged undeniably, but Michael's motivations were rooted in desperation, not pure malice. It changed everything. My protective instinct for Harold remained, but a new, uncomfortable empathy for Michael began to stir. I found myself thinking about his shy smile, the genuine gratitude he'd shown for my lemon bars. He was a young man, clearly talented, but caught in a vicious corporate machine. I also realized my own quick judgment, my eagerness to label Michael as a villain, had been too simplistic. This was a human story, not a black and white one. And Eric, my nosy neighbor, had been the one to uncover the nuanced truth, the one to show a depth of understanding I hadn't given him credit for. My perception of him had irrevocably shifted. It wasn't just a conduit for gossip. He had a surprising capacity for genuine empathy and a relentless drive for truth, however uncomfortable. He wasn't just observing, he was understanding asterisk. With this new understanding, Harold's lawyer, Ms. Davies, adjusted her strategy. Instead of focusing solely on Michael's malicious intent, she shifted to Omnitech's predatory practices and the unethical pressure placed on employees. This broadened the scope of the case, putting the corporate giant, not just a desperate young man, in the crosshairs. She initiated an internal investigation request, citing the digital evidence and adding the element of corporate coercion. Omnitech, probably realizing the potential for a public relations nightmare and a drawn-out legal battle, surprisingly offered a settlement rather quickly. They offered Harold a substantial severance package, full retirement benefits, and a non-disclosure agreement regarding the details of his departure. No public admission of wrongdoing, but Harold would not be fired. He would retire early. His reputation would be intact, and importantly, his financial security was restored. Harold, after much deliberation, decided to take it. He was tired of fighting. He wanted his peace back. "I just want to put this behind me, Joan," he'd said, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. "I got my dignity back, that's enough." Harold's recovery was gradual. He started coming over for coffee again, his shoulders less slumped, his eyes regaining their spark. He even started a small consulting business, helping local small businesses with their accounting, something he genuinely enjoyed. He found a new purpose, a new path forward that wasn't tied to the corporate world that had almost destroyed him. And his relationship with Eric blossomed in a surprising way. Eric, having proven himself a valuable ally, now often joined us for coffee. He still talked a lot, but his observations were more insightful, less judgmental. He even started volunteering at the local animal shelter, channeling his prodigious energy into something constructive. Grown, matured, his curiosity now tempered with compassion. And me, I learned to appreciate the complexities of people, to look beyond first impressions. My quiet retirement was indeed over, but in its place was a rich tapestry of unexpected friendships and a newfound willingness to engage with the messiness of life. Michael Nguyen eventually moved away, quietly, a few months after the settlement. I never saw him again, but I often wondered about him, hoped he found a better path. Life, I mused over my morning coffee, was rarely as simple as a crossword puzzle. And sometimes, the biggest blessings came wrapped in the most unexpected, nosy packages.